In an empire where Congress knows nothing, the ubiquitous DC think tank is all. And the Israel lobby and their neocon allies must own a dozen. Well, Americans have a lobby in Washington, too. It's called the Council for the National Interest at councilforthenationalinterest.org. They advocate for us on Capitol Hill. Join CNI to demand an end to the U.S.-sponsored occupation of the Palestinians and an end to our government's destructive empire in the Middle East. That's the Council for the National Interest at councilforthenationalinterest.org. Hey everybody, Scott Horton here for LibertyStickers.com. If you're like me, then you're right all the time, surrounded by people in desperate need of correction. Well, we can't all have a radio show, but we can all get anti-government propaganda to stick on the back of our trucks. Check out LibertyStickers.com. Categories include anti-war, empire, police state, libertarian, Ron Paul, gun rights, founders quotes, and of course the stupid election. That's LibertyStickers.com. Everyone else's stickers suck. Hey y'all, Scott Horton here. After the show, you should check out one of my sponsors, WallStreetWindow.com. It's a financial blog written by Mike Swanson, a former hedge fund manager who's investing in commodities, mining stocks, and European markets. Mike's site, WallStreetWindow.com, is unique in that he shows people what he's really investing in, updating you when he buys or sells in his main account. Mike's betting his positions are going to go up due to the Federal Reserve printing all that money to finance the deficit. See what happens at WallStreetWindow.com. And if you'd like to sponsor the show too, let me know at Scott@ScottHorton.org. For KPFK 90.7 FM in Los Angeles, September 21st, 2012, I'm Scott Horton. This is Anti-War Radio. All right, everybody, welcome to the show. I'm Scott Horton. My website is ScottHorton.org. I keep all my interview archives there, more than 2,500 of them now, going back to 2003. And the big news of the day is that the State Department has delisted the Mujahideen-e-Khalq, M-E-K, communist terrorist cult, from the State Department's list of officially designated terrorist organizations. Well, our guest is Jeremiah Goulka. He's the co-author of this Rand Corporation study, The Mujahideen-e-Khalq in Iraq, a Policy Conundrum, and has examined their group up close and written about them at length, also for Salon.com and the American Prospect as well. Welcome to the show. How are you doing?
I'm really good, Scott. Thanks for having me on again.
Well, I'm very happy to have you here, and I want to turn to today's New York Times right here. Iranian dissidents convince U.S. to drop terror label. What they say here is that, yes, it's true that the MEK carried out terrorist attacks in the 70s and the 1980s, first against the Shah and then later against the Ayatollahs, including against Americans there. And yes, they allied with Saddam Hussein. But by most accounts, reads the New York Times, the MEK has not carried out violent attacks for many years. Is that correct?
Well, that's certainly what most accounts are. I mean, it's an interesting situation here where I think it's agreed that on the confirmed attack level, that they haven't done confirmed attacks since 2001 or 2002. What the stuff that's been reported in the last couple of years, like what Seymour Hersh reported in the New Yorker about them being trained by some American Special Forces folks, or the MEK working in conjunction with the Israelis to assassinate Iranian nuclear weapons scientists. We've talked about on the show. It's been discussed a lot. I don't think it has the same level of confirmation for what that's worth. So it's an interesting thing here with the State Department announcing that, with a sort of pre-announcement kind of that the State Department is intending to officially remove the MEK from the foreign terrorist organization list. I haven't had personal access to classified materials or anything, so if I did, I couldn't talk about them. But if I did, I would have known. I might have been able to see whether there's some smoking gun here or not that we don't know about. But it basically, all the observers have assumed that this was a done deal. And as you and I discussed before, we're kind of wondering whether whether if they were going to indeed be removed, if the state would do it officially or just wait for the clock to run out from the court decision and then just let it happen.
Right. There's a court decision saying that the State Department had to hurry up and decide whether they were going to keep them on or not, which was kind of strange. Is there some kind of automatic sunset? You have to be renewed as a terrorist by the State Department, or how's that work anyway?
Yeah, the statute, it's originally was the Anti-Terrorism and Effective Death Penalty Act of 1996. So there's a whole process, and it's been changed a couple times over the years. But basically, what happens is when the government puts someone on a group on the list, the Congress put in an option to both reflect change in circumstances as well as to give an incentive for terrorist groups to give up violence. And the groups can, after 2 years, petition the court to get the State Department to reevaluate. And the law has changed at various times, and the MEK basically followed the law in the sense of each time they had a legal opportunity to ask for a change, they did so. The difference in this last bunch was that the MEK managed to persuade a court to say that the last time that they were renewed on the list, which was actually done at the end of the Bush administration, the very tail end, that the process involved wasn't adequate from a legal point of view, and so the process needed to be done again. And the State Department and this administration basically took their time, and the MEK was had another petition saying, essentially asking the court to say chop chop or make a decision. And if you don't make a decision within a certain amount of time, the court will just automatically remove them. And well, that's what's happened. So it's a little bit of procedurally convoluted.
All right, now, well, it is, but I guess I see what you're saying though, that what that means, in effect, is the State Department has to recertify them. And since there's all this political pressure to not, it sort of has expired rather than they've been designated terror-free. They just haven't been relisted. Is that basically correct?
Yeah, it's
sort of the way Congress votes themselves a raise. It's automatic unless they pass a bill saying we don't want to raise this year.
Yeah, I think it's basically, it puts the pressure onto a group to say, look, we've changed our ways. And the MEK has, it's such an interesting group. They are truly a fringe, small potatoes group. They, in terms of their actual support in Iran, is minuscule, but they seem to have access to significant resources, and they've mounted this huge lobbying campaign. And it's one of the things that I'm really, wondering. And maybe sometime I'll be able to have an answer on this. Who knows? This is one of those things you kind of wish you were a fly on the wall in the various rooms to know how much of this is the decision to take them off the list is truly about the lobbying. How much of it is about the lack of confirmed or sufficiently confirmed violence, or maybe there is more violence that we don't even know about, and the state made a political decision. Who knows? But one of the things that is a factor here is the issue of getting the folks in the MEK out of Camp Ashraf and down to the old Camp Liberty to have a process, to have people go through a proper international process.
All right, now wait a minute. You got to stop and give them a little bit of background there. Camp Ashraf is the camp where Saddam Hussein kept them very well for 30 years. Yeah,
so sorry to make that jump. So when the MEK, after they were exiled from Iran right after the revolution in the early 80s, in 1986, Saddam welcomed the MEK into Iraq in exchange for help in the Iran-Iraq war. And so the MEK, which had once upon a time had some real support in Iran, decides to join forces with the enemy and the starter of the aggressor of the Iran-Iraq war and fight against Iranian troops. And this just demolished the MEK's credibility in Iran. It just ended it. But since then, during the rest of Saddam's reign, he provided war material, several camps, money to the MEK, although the MEK denies a lot of that. made Iraq their home. And so they had these various camps. And then in 2003, when the U.S. invasion happened, the U.S. consolidated the MEK's people in Iraq at the biggest of the camps, Camp Ashraf. And so they were there until, now very recently. But the desire was, Iraq was very clear that it did not want the MEK, the new government of Iraq did not want the MEK within Iraq, that they were there illegally, that they had participated in the suppression of the Shia and Kurdish uprisings after the 1991 Gulf War, and they were persona non grata. And of course, the Iraq government is very close to the Iran government, and the Iranian regime really hates the MEK. So they want the MEK out. But to do that...
Well, plus, and they had helped Saddam crush the Great Bay of Pigs in the desert in 1991, when George Bush Sr. had encouraged the Shiites and the Kurds to rise up against Saddam and had promised to help them, and then did not help them, and sat back and watched Saddam Hussein use the MEK to waste them all by at least 100,000 killed.
Yeah, it's interesting how the MEK, of course, totally denies that, but the perception is widely held in Iraq that they worked very closely with Saddam in the suppression of those uprisings, and it's appalling. And so, in order to have any hope of resettling the members of the MEK in some other country, they need to go through a process that there are international processes, and the perception of at least of the international folks who want to do this is that they couldn't happen at Camp Ashraf, which I think is probably true. And so, in order to get everyone to move from Camp Ashraf to the camps on the former American military base of Camp Liberty, the State Department seemed to think that it was necessary to basically offer this carrot. And in the end, with the time running short, they finally got everybody out of Camp Ashraf. And I think so. One of the things it's a complicated story, but I think it bears mentioning that there is a humanitarian element to this. The MEK turned into a cult after the Iran-Iraq War, and since then they've had a very hard time recruiting new members, and a lot of the new members, or at least some significant quantity of them, were recruited through deceptive means. And these folks some of them were able to leave after the 2003 invasion, but many have stayed, and whether the MEK will make it sound like it was a voluntary decision to stay, but when you're talking about people in cults, you really have to wonder how voluntary it is. And the only chance that people have of getting out of a cult, should they actually want to, of course, is for them to get out of the cult's complete under control and geographic control. And so if the MEK members are now have a chance of getting resettled somewhere, there is that humanitarian benefit here. And no country other than Iran was willing to take anybody as long as the MEK was on the U.S. Foreign Terrorist Organization list. Now they may, a lot of countries may still not want to, but at least that was one big legitimate stumbling block for anyone wanting to admit MEK members into their country. But in talking about the cults of it is the kids. The kids are not with them. So when the transition of the group into a cult started basically the first hints of it are 1985, and then it starts happening in earnest at the end of the Iran-Iraq War, when the war is over, and then the MEK decides its leader, Masoud Rajavi, decides to have their own invasion of Iran in the hope that they would basically rally Iranians to join them and then all go on to Tehran and take the government. And, this was just, it's one of those decisions that is amazing that it could possibly have happened, because clearly they had lost so much support in Iran by having already fought with Saddam. So it completely backfires. They lose like a third of their people in the process. And what Rajavi does is he says that part of the reason that they lost in this invasion, which was called Operation Eternal Light, was not that it was, an insane invasion in the first place, was because they lacked proper military discipline, and they had uniforms, and they called themselves the National Liberation Army, and were had lots of military material from Saddam, but they said that it lacked military discipline, and the reason why was because of love, because they had too many families there, they had too many friends, they had too many men and women together. And so what Rajavi does is he forces everyone to get divorced and adopt celibacy. They would claim that this is just normal military procedures, but we know that they don't actually mandate divorce, for instance, in the our military. So they mandate divorce, they mandate celibacy. They take the children and send them to Europe. Actually, the sending children to Europe happened around the 1991 invasion, and these were just first steps of turning the group into a cult. Now they'll deny it. When I've spoken with for instance, one of the spokesmen for the MEK said, "Well, the desert of Iraq just can't support family life." Well, I'm sure if you asked any Iraqi family who lives in the desert of Iraq whether it can, I think they'd disagree. So no one wants to be called a cult, and so of course they deny it. So other things that the group did. They have what's called emotional isolation. This is a term in cult studies where it's disconnecting people from friends, family, relatives. They limited access to media, mostly focusing on their own MEK-created media, sleep deprivation, food deprivation, make work. Make work projects can be done to glorify the cult, and so you can see that all across Camp Ashraf, which is this little town in the middle of the desert that just pops up in the middle of the desert and has these beautiful fountains everywhere, monuments, and so a lot of the make work projects were just to support their own sense of grandeur. And then they have these things called sessions. So one of the things that cults do is a lot of social cruelty. So one of the things that the MEK does is they're called sessions, and they're in small, large, different size groups, different frequencies of time, bring people together, and one of the things that they do is ask people to record and then report their sexual thoughts. So again, this is in a world of forced celibacy. They then require people to admit to their sexual thoughts and then get jeered for having sexual thoughts. But then if someone denies sexual thoughts, they get jeered too because obviously they're lying. It's just these are the types of practices I've heard lots of reports from former members of people being detained for some period of time. Some of the more extreme stories, I'm not always sure what to trust, of course. When I was there at Camp Ashraf in 2007, I saw, for instance, how the gas station has segregated hours, how men and women are not allowed to actually have physical contact. It turns out that people, if they want to talk to each other, had to get permission through their commander. The individual places where people slept were these sort of mini camps that were fenced in to keep people in, and there were lots of people who escaped to the American facility nearby. And I mean, when they escaped, it was like it was jailbreak kind of escape. I mean, it was these exciting stories of running away through the night to avoid MEK guards. And,
like fleeing from East Germany or something back in the 80s, right?
Yeah, it was really the stuff of high adventure.
Wow. And so now, is it possible then that the plan of the U.S. government here in moving them from Camp Ashraf to Camp Liberty and then eventually out of Iraq before Maliki kills them all, is it maybe the plan is to kick them out a few at a time and to sort of break up the group and to set these people free? Am I just, lost in the fantasy that Hillary Clinton cares at all, or what?
No, I think this is one of those situations where actually the sort of likelihood probably matches with the best outcome. As it may be possible that some country will decide that they really want to have 3,000 members of a cult group that was on a terrorist list. Maybe they have sufficient resources. Maybe some countries' leaders will be bribed into giving passports to 3,000 people. or 1,000 people or 500 people. I suppose that's in the realm of possibility. I'd be surprised. I expect that there would be lots of that when countries raise their hands, they will raise their hands for like 3 people, 5 people, I don't know, maybe 20 people, just a small number, and then the possibility of folks branching out onto their own and maybe getting some cult deprogramming becomes possible. I also think that the State Department wants what it has wanted for a very long time, which is to have this issue off its plate, which is pretty understandable.
Yeah. And now, as far as how violent they aren't anymore and all that, where we started this conversation, it was you referred to that NBC report about from this year, from February of this year, about the Mossad using the MEK to assassinate nuclear scientists and others inside Iran. And the thing about that story was, I think Seymour Hersh probably knew what he was talking about. In fact, I think Scott Ritter probably knew what he was talking about when he wrote in 2005 that MEK was working for Donald Rumsfeld and setting off bombs in Iran. My own wife, Larissa Alexandrovna, reported in 2006, I believe it was, in 2 different reports about the Defense Department using them for at least intelligence missions inside Iran, although I don't think she could confirm violent acts at that time. But anyway, the thing about that NBC piece from February is that it came from the White House. This was clearly an extremely authorized leak, right? This wasn't Bradley Manning heroically liberated this truth and uploaded it to WikiLeaks. This was Barack Obama was trying to put off Benjamin Netanyahu, and this was one of the pawns that he played in his chess game was, hey, did I ever tell you all about that time that Netanyahu used the MEK to kill all those scientists? And that shut him up for a couple of weeks, right? That was the context in which that report came out. It came from the White House.
I mean, I don't know specifics of exactly how it came out, but I mean I think that what you said is totally plausible. So
well, at least it was clear, wasn't it, that it was one of those very authorized stories in the news rather than something that was
smelled like it.
Wrung out of a mid-level source somewhere.
Yeah, it absolutely smelled like it. So it's really interesting to see how that goes, and I do wonder if there were if the lawyers were involved in saying, well, is it, are we talking about terrorism or are we talking about violence? And if it's terrorism, does terrorism count when it's against a government target? Is that terrorism or does it have to be against the public? Because there is, of course, that whole dialogue, debate about what counts as.
Wouldn't it be hilarious if they ever had to ask themselves, would it be terrorism if the Iranians hired a communist terrorist cult to shoot American nuclear scientists on their way to work at Los Alamos, for example?
Yeah, they would be like, that's not terrorism, that's just an act of war. Yeah,
we'd be dropping hydrogen bombs on them in a day.
Yeah, the reversing the hypotheticals on what we've done regarding Iran and then get mad when they seem mad at us is kind of ridiculous. And you've seen there's been a bunch of interesting kind of looks at that, and Tom Engelhardt had one on Tom Dispatch, and I've seen some others elsewhere that look at just the long list of it. To add the sanctions, add the greater presence of our naval presence in the Persian Gulf, add the fact that we have contracts developing to build new naval vessels that at least their public sales pitch is that we need them in order to have close in patrolling of the Iranian coast. I mean, it's pretty intense. I mean, one of the things I find interesting here is that at least in years past, people would talk about the effect that removing the MEK from the list would have on the Iranian government and on the Iranian people. Would it annoy the government too much? And I think just from what we're talking about now, it shows. It's a drop in the bucket from the things that we do if we are concerned about how we press the Iranian regime up against the wall and what might be ramifications of that. The other one I find kind of interesting is the people. We wonder, are we going to have any greater or lesser legitimacy as people dedicated to democracy among the Iranian people. But, with the sanctions and with a lot of other both actual and perceived American policies in the Middle East, I can't really imagine that the Iranian people would have really seen us as saviors or sort of even honest brokers. That said, I'm sure that the regime will make a lot of hay among the Iranian people just to show that, say that it's taking it off the list is somehow shows that we're not honest brokers. One thing I think the State Department does need to do. Oh, yeah, we're not.
That's the whole thing. The Leverett's, Flint and Hillary Mann, Leverett, both of them former National Security Council level people, different jobs, but that kind of level. In the Bush years, they keep the blog Race for Rand, and they says this is the ultimate in the moral and strategic bankruptcy of the American policy there. Not just how wrong it is, but how completely stupid it is to back the MEK like this. And
I think what state needs to do, I don't know if it kind of will do, or even if it kind of can, is blow the horn again and again and again and again to say that this is not about supporting the MEK. This is just removing a group from the terrorist list doesn't mean you like the group. But the Iranian regime will probably make it sound like we do. And the MEK, I think, will try to make it sound like we do.
Well, General McInerney, the Air Force guy, Fox News watchers might know who I'm talking about, real warmonger. He was cited, I think, at the Foreign Policy Initiative at a pro-MEK rally, and the guys at NIAC, the National Iranian American Council, had quoted him talking about, we need to delist these guys so that we can use them as terrorists without breaking the law. Right now it's against the law to use them, but once we delist them, then we can use them in what he called tit-for-tat attacks against Iran, which, he didn't explain what attacks Iran has been committing, but still.
Right. One of the things I found really interesting when doing the research for the report I did when I was at RAND was the mixtures of opinion among military officers and some intelligence officials about the value of the MEK, of what it can do. And you had some people who thought that they would be really useful, and most thought that they were pretty useless. And a few were very cold-minded and thought that they would be useful as bullet catchers, just so that there'd be, less American dead, more of them, which is, a cold.
Yeah, but in the event of what conflict, right?
Yeah, there are some people who seem to really like the idea of an invasion of Iran.
Boy, oh boy. Well, I talked one time long ago with Wayne White, a former State Department guy, and it was supposed to be an Iran interview, but it ended up so much about the beginning of the Iran-Iraq war and how Saddam Hussein thought he was going to roll right in, and that, just like you talked about, MEK believed at the end of the Iran-Iraq war that they were going to somehow be able to stroll right in where Saddam had failed. And, the point being, it didn't work out very well for either of them.
No, and it's for people who think about us invading Iran, and if they're thinking about the first couple months of the 2003 invasion of Iraq, well, we probably, with our just vastly overwhelming force, could roll right in. But then, what next? What will the next many years be of many years of violence and sectarian strife and insurgency and terrorism? And there's no way it could be any better than even if it was better planned. I think there's no way it could actually be a better outcome than what happened in Iraq or even Afghanistan. They just have to expect it would be terrible. But then I think people have a tendency to look at things in rosy, that'll be better this time ways.
All right, we're way over time. I got to go. Thank you so much for your time, Jeremiah. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Scott.
Everybody, this is Jeremiah Goulka. His website is jeremiahgoulka.com, and you can find his writing at Tom Dispatch, and especially you can find his MEK work at rand.org, the Mujahideen-e-Khalq in Iraq. That's it for the radio show tonight. Thanks everybody for listening. I'm Scott Horton. My website is scotthorton.org. My full archive of interviews, more than 2,500 going back to 2003, are available there. See you here next week, 6:30 to 7 on KPFK 90.7 FM in LA. The Scott Horton Show is brought to you by the Future Freedom Foundation at FFF.org. Join the great Jacob Hornberger and some of the best writers in the libertarian movement like James Bovard, Sheldon Richman, Anthony Gregory, Wendy McElroy, and more for a real individualist take on the most important matters of peace, liberty, and prosperity in our society. That's the Future Freedom Foundation at FFF.org. Hey ladies, Scott Horton here. If you would like truly youthful, healthy, and healthy-looking skin, there is one very special company you need to visit, Dagny & Lane at dagnyandlane.com. Dagny & Lane has revolutionized the industry with a full line of products made from organic and all-natural ingredients that penetrate deeply with nutrient-rich ionic minerals and antioxidants for healthy and beautiful skin. That's Dagny & Lane at dagnyandlane.com. And for a limited time, add promo code SCOTT15 at checkout for a 15% discount. Hey y'all, Scott here. As you know, I've been laid off from antiwar.com, and I've embarked on a mission to make this show into a real business. And as you can tell, I've been doing all right at lining up some sponsors, and some great ones at that. But it isn't enough, so the perpetual fund drive rolls on. The Scott Horton Show needs donors and more advertisers if the show is to outlast my meager savings. So please, stop by scotthorton.org/donate. You can make single donations or sign up for a monthly subscription with PayPal. You don't need an account with them to do so. Or use Google Wallet, WePay.com, Give.org, and now even accepting Bitcoins. And if you own or represent a company or organization interested in sponsoring the show, please email Scott at scotthorton.org so we can work it out. That's scotthorton.org/donate. And thanks.